Hey there, pretty good parents. Welcome to another episode. It's always nice, Josh, to look over and see a big smiling face. Whenever you
that's what I
hear we
do.
come in with a good, solid intro, I
Yeah.
just feel like it's
I'm anticipating like,
just, what is he going to say? I don't know.
yeah.
Anyways, welcome, pretty good parents. Got a great episode for you. And again, thanks for being here. That means you care about parenting and your kids, probably. I'm sure you love your kids. So that's great. So what are we talking about today, Josh?
Well, we are going to talk about how someone can talk to their teen. And it's not off limits to any preteen kids. A lot of the same mechanics and same ideas, but teens are their own animals in a sense of the amount of emotional and physiological changes can make it very challenging to talk to your teen. So it's one of the questions I get asked the most is like, what am I supposed to say? How do I talk to them in a way that's not going to shut them down? I seem to irritate them all the time, or we need to talk to them about this, but they won't engage. So we're going to just talk through some of the mechanics and mindset of how to talk to your teen.
Yeah. So I have a 12-year-old that is the oldest kid in our family. I'm starting to see some of it. Just a little bit, there's just a little preteen, having to dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
And so I'm fascinated to dive in. So what exactly, I guess, do we want to elaborate on? Obviously, teens are going through a lot of physiological changes. I'm sure that plays a role in some of this.
It's a huge part of it, right? Their teenage experience, which is said more accurately, like just their life and what they're going through. It's easy for parents to assume that they don't have anything going on, really. They don't have to pay any bills. Don't have to worry about taxes.
They have no idea how lucky they have it, right?
That's the parent perspective, right?
Exactly.
But if you could try to like rewind the clock and think, what was it like for you to be a kid? You were stressed about some things or a lot of things, right? Especially during those teenage years where you're becoming more aware. You're not as mindful as maybe when you were 5, where it was just like play in a sandbox and throw the ball and recess bell goes off and you go in. You have relationships, you have body changes, you have groups, you have dreams, you have expectations you feel like society and teachers and coaches and parents are putting on you. It's a lot of pressure for someone who doesn't really know who they are. That's not a solidified concept yet. It's in remodel or construction mode, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not even like a fully built structure. There's a ton of what feels like you're supposed to have it figured out, but you don't. So we're trying to like enter into this space of a teenager when they don't know who they are fully, and they're trying to sort out like, well, who does mom want me to be? Dad want me to be? Teachers, friends, society. Who do I want to be? Who am I? Like in some cases, unanswerable questions and concerns. And then we want to talk to them about something that we want to talk to them about, or they've done something wrong. We've got to talk to them about it. We're entering into this like invisible space of like emotional warfare that we don't even know sometimes. Mm-hmm. So being mindful of there's a lot going on there. Just because they don't have your life doesn't mean they don't have stress like you.
Right.
So understanding that component.
And it's probably good for parents to just take a little pause and, like you said, go back and rethink when they were a teen and
those middle school years. Like, no, thank you.
I mean, for me, I can specifically remember not knowing who I was and
like you didn't know your name.
Well, yeah, but literally trying to emulate. So I had a buddy and we looked up to his older brothers, right?
Yeah.
And, they were both good athletes and pretty cool kids, and we kind of wanted to be like that. But they had a certain gait and a certain walk. And I remember practicing that. I'm like, I'm going to walk like that. Yeah. I'm like, or I could just walk, but those are probably the things that teenagers deal
you're like
with.
You're trying these identities on.
Yeah.
Right? It's like a wardrobe change.
Yeah.
And we've seen it. I don't know if you went through any significant changes personally, but I had friends or classmates that with over a few years like changed identity groups.
Oh yeah,
like significantly, right? Like, well, they used to be in this group. By the end of the year, why? Because they're sorting it out, trying it on. Like, does this fit? Do I like the way this feels? And so, for us to to miscalculate what it's like to be a teenager and then be bothered that they're maybe distracted or emotionally like on guard for our conversations or what feels like our lectures or whatever is is a problem. So we're trying to unpack that, but from the parents' standpoint is to be more understanding. Let's assume they don't have it all figured out. Maybe they're worried, maybe they're uneasy, unsettled on the inside, and you want to talk to them like, well, that's complicated. Knowing the timing, the setting, the mood, how often you ask a question versus make a statement or a lecture point, all those things matter. But that, and you're like right with Judd being preteen, it's not unique to teenage years. It's just learning how to like recognize, is your kid available? Are they open or closed? And if it's closed, don't force your way in unless you really have to. Otherwise, you're likely to not. You're likely going to get thrown something at you, or emotionally or physically in some cases. When it's like, get out of here! I don't want to talk to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the what, right? Is you want a meaningful relationship with your kid for all the obvious reasons. You want to teach them, love them, interact, help them, hear about their day, shared experiences. And you don't want this relationship to stop when they leave the house. You want it to go on forever. Being able to talk to your kids a big deal. So you're paving the road for future conversations as well with some of these mechanics. So that's kind of the what that we're talking about today.
Okay. And then, I always like to ask the why. So like why, I guess, why is it, so important that we know how to talk to our teens, right?
Yeah. Well, if you want to have a meaningful relationship with your kid,
which I do, yeah,
you need to be able to talk to them in a way that works for both of you.
Yeah.
Right. You might get done with the talk and be like, yeah, that was really good. But if you don't know what it was like for them, or come to find out they zone you out and they've got you paraphrased, and now they're just like, oh, dad's doing his thing again. Dad's doing his baseball talk. Dad's doing another one of his like golf stories.
Yeah.
And they just zone you out. You're not going to have the kind of relationship you really want. So being able to be in tune with that is really important. Paves the road for, bigger conversations down the road. You might be talking about a class or a thing have a practice, but you want to be able to handle heavier conversations, right? Like what college you're going to go to, or how this breakup is handling them, or they're going to decide whether they're going to take this job or have a kid, or these big life things that you want to have maybe put in practice and built that reputation that we can have those meaningful conversations. How we talk to them isn't always on us, but it can often open them up or shut them down depending on how we do it, when we do it, why we're doing it. But we want to be aware of, we want them to talk to us. So doing it in a way that works for them makes a ton of sense. Just getting our needs met by getting these certain answers that we have in our head, like, well, who was there and what time did you get home and what did this teacher say? That's just information that we want to like put out our own fire of concern. But if they're not interested in it, it's going to take a little bit of strategy and maneuvering and timing to be able to get them to engage in that.
Yeah.
And it feels like a dance a lot of the time, right? Like you're trying to read the situation to know, are they in it? If so, let's go for it. If not, wait a little bit, right? We'll talk more about like some of those mechanical hows, but
yeah. Well, I would also assume too that, as a parent, you can probably see that your kids do need some wisdom and some life guidance in some of these situations, and they're probably not going to just ask for it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe learning how to do that without doing a lecture would probably be really important.
Yeah. When do they ask for?
Yeah, because
like,
I was saying our preteen
wise,
experience,
Dad.
they're not asking a lot of questions.
Not asking.
So like,
well, they don't ask more necessarily because in teenage years either.
Yeah.
Even though you'd think like this is the time of your life, you should be asking.
Right.
Anyone that you think has something figured out, asking them how or why or what should I do. I don't know if it's this weird privacy and like desire for independence that a teenager starts to feel, and they don't want to just be like their mom and dad. but asking why. Don't expect them to ask why. If they do ask you like, why do you do that, Dad? Or what do you think I should do in this situation? Just absolutely celebrate it and cherish that, because that's not going to be very common. Most of the time you're thinking, I could give you some really good advice for your situation right now, and you don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to force it in there because you'd be better off having it than not having it.
Right.
But yeah, we want them to be wise. We want them to be happy. We've talked about that, in the other podcasts. Like, what do you want for your children? Well, I want them to be happy. I want them to be healthy. Okay. Well, they're probably not going to ask you a lot of questions. So you're going to have to like figure out kind of the code breaking strategy of how do you share wisdom with them when they don't want to talk to you?
Mm-hmm.
So learning that part of it. Another huge part of it that I think gets overlooked is this is your opportunity to teach them good communication skills.
Yeah.
Like
Again, we're back to the modeling.
Exactly.
Right.
You want them to be different than maybe your childhood experience, or you want to set them up the best way possible for their parenting or their partnering kind of relationships. You practicing now, communicating to your kids with these kind of effective tools is likely to teach them how to do that for themselves someday.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's not a lecture. It's in our relationship, in a conversation, but hopefully they start to adopt that language and they ask questions versus make bold statements, and they, reflect versus accuse, or, they can say something validating versus argumentative. So how we do that, not surprisingly, is being absorbed and taught indirectly. And so it's a huge responsibility. Like, I hear from a lot of parents, I don't know how to do that. That was never modeled for me.
Right.
And so they don't have anything to go off of. And so what do they have in their head? Worry and concern, or a lot of hope for their kid. And they're thinking, I have this like present, this gift I want to give them. They don't seem to want it, but it's so good. I just need to figure out how to get them to accept it. And then sometimes it's like forced on them.
Yeah.
Versus the skill set of how to talk to someone that doesn't want to talk to you, or your kid, not just anybody, but your teen, when they'd be better off being able to glean some of your wisdom. It's a skill set, and it's a little bit of a dance to get that wisdom in there. But
Right.
They're better off getting more and more wisdom. You just can't say, you need to accept my wisdom. You don't have it all figured out. You need to listen to people. That's true, but that's not going to open the door, right? So the why, they don't have it all figured out. They're absorbing a ton from you as a parent, but also the world around them. And you'd like to have a positive influence. If you don't know how to talk to your kid, you're basically not getting a chance to teach them and share with them the things you believe and you care about. It's going to leave them open to the rest of the world, and who knows who they are or what their messaging is.
Right.
So you think if you care about teaching your kids and sharing your life with your kids, the medium in which that typically occurs is conversation and communication. So how to talk to your teen is basically, not exclusively, but basically, how do you share your life lessons in a way that's going to help them? And so not to be able to do it shuts that down.
Right. And again, I think I love that whole idea of modeling, but my assumption, not having gone through the teenage years yet with the kids, you can't go model everything all the time, right? So you're going to be forced to these situations where you really need to talk and break through and give some guidance or something like that, right?
Yeah. Well,
so.
Yeah, and that probably falls more into the how. I was going to give some examples, but you're right. Like, you have to be intentional, and it doesn't always just occur out of the blue. You have to be thinking, like, I have to talk about this topic. Like, our son said this the other night, or we've learned that our daughter's been doing this, and we don't think that's healthy, or we have concerns about that. We've got to talk to them, right? And so then the how is a big deal. We'll talk about how not to do it a little bit, because there's plenty of those examples. Those come natural to us a lot of time. But
let's dive into the how. So do you have some good how steps?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, it's a blend of setting, body language and nonverbals, and what words, what is it conversational, is it lecture? So we'll start with the basic one is ideally it's conversationally based.
Okay.
Okay, so how was your day? What was going on? What was really exciting? You might be thinking, I have got to ask them about this thing we found in their room,
Right.
right? Or so-and-so's parents told us that they weren't where they said they were the other night. And man, I've got to that's driving me crazy and I want to find out what it is. But if you go in heavy with this accusation, right, they're likely to get defensive and to shut down or lie or throw something back versus feel like kind of like primed a little bit for a conversation. So conversationally based, how was your day? Hey,
Sounds like that was a question.
It was how was the day?
Yeah.
Fine.
Right.
You know, if it's a teenage boy, it's fine, or a grunt, or I don't know. If it's a teenage girl, you might get a lot more. You still might get fine, but then the dam breaks like 5 minutes later and a lot comes out.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between the genders in terms of how much they're going to share. It's harder to have these talks with a boy. And so I'll make maybe some like boy specific tips and examples and then some girl specific, just because in general they're different in terms of how much they communicate. So conversationally based, okay, what does that look like for a teenage boy? One word answers a lot of the time. Sometimes like,
it was good.
Fine, good, I don't know. Okay.
All right. Well, we're officially at that stage, so this is great.
Yeah. So an interesting question to maybe switch things up a little bit, because maybe they've been conditioned to this already, like line of questioning. They get in the car, they come home. Hey, oh, so good to see you. How was your day? Fine. Oh, what'd you do? Nothing. You know, did you learn anything? No. You know, they're used to that because we've done it 100 times or something, right? So I try to mix it up a little bit. I'm like, well, did anything shock you today?
Yeah, there you go.
Did a kid do something really stupid that like made you laugh? Or did you do something that really stupid that made other people laugh? Right? Did it go the way you wanted it to go? Did you learn anything that you'd like to share? You know, and that's usually like, no, I didn't learn anything, even though they learned something. Just interesting questions to open different doors, to kind of grease the track for a conversation versus the typical like, you know, what did you learn? Did you go to your class? How was it? Do you have homework? What's your plan for tonight? You know, we need to ask those questions sometimes, right? Yes. Do you have homework? Okay. How was your day? I just say, how was your day? And it works for both of my kids. But if it didn't, I would start going through different doors, you know, and I would say, were all your friends at school today? Was anyone sick?
Yeah.
Was there any drama today? I'd love to hear about your drama.
Yeah.
You know, and that door is way easier for them to come through versus more of a spotlight question of like, how was your day? There's so much that happens in their day.
Right.
They're like, well, I don't even know where to start. And then I would say, I don't know. I don't have it organized. And so I'm going to say, fine. Or I don't really want to share with you because you're going to end up like making comments about this friend that then you're going to tell me I shouldn't hang out with them. And so it's just like, fine, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
I've actually been trying, what was the funniest thing that happened to you today?
Yeah.
And I guess I've been getting sort of maybe 60% answers, 40% where it's like, well, this really funny thing happened, but I don't want to share with you, Dad, because you know, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the younger ones, like they definitely will be, it'll make them think a little bit. And I can see them like, oh yeah, that actually was really funny. And you know, they'll usually share, which is cool.
So that brings up a good point. That if your teen doesn't feel like there's if they're not incentivized to share the truth, they're not going to share the truth. If they're de-incentivized, if they are facing consequences about sharing their real life, they're not incentivized to, right? It makes all the sense in the world that they would withhold that. So that's a great example of, if you really want to know about your teen's life, you've got to be able to hear something you don't like and not immediately transition to consequences.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to want to talk to you if every time they share something they did or their friends did, you make their life less enjoyable, they're incentivized to avoid that, right? And not tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to have a conversation on the way home, this is an exaggeration, but to make the point clear, I would say none of these things will be used in a court of law.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to take you on the record. I might have to, if you said you did this really bad thing, and we're going to have to really talk about how to address it. But I don't want them to think I'm just getting the scoop to give consequences.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the relationship I want. I might have to give consequences if something happens, but I'd rather explore it with them, figure out what they think of it before I jump to consequences, and then it shuts the whole conversation down. So
would it be fair to say just come into this conversation with an observational mindset? Like you're just there to observe.
Yeah.
Right. You're not
almost like you're their uncle, their aunt.
Right.
Not needing to like bust them or worry about their future.
Yeah.
You care about them, but you have a different angle if it's like your niece or your nephew that you're asking questions of.
Yeah.
Versus your kid that you feel, solely responsible for. But yeah, the observational, we care more than just the observant person. But if we kind of play a role of, I'm not here as a detective, I'm here just trying to connect. Oh, kids were doing cocaine at school today. All right, what's the parent alarm? I'm calling the police, I'm calling the principal, you're transitioning schools, or your friend group needs to change, or
right.
But that's not productive in you want to get more information, and you don't want to take a dump on the relationship and the conversation. So you continue to say, oh my gosh, how was that for you? What was your thought process? Did someone offer it to you? Yes or no, or maybe they did. Oh man, what did you say? If I know it, you might not be able to have that calm of a voice, but if you can keep your voice calm, you don't raise the level of urgency, and they don't feel like you're on the witch hunt for like their friends, or you're going to go tell the principal, and now like their parent is the one outing this activity at school. That's not a conversational tone you want to have. You want to be able to say, I care about you. I may or may not have to say anything. I don't know. I'm not worried about that right now. I'm wondering like how that was for you. And did you feel like you handled it well? Do you feel like you know how you want to handle that tomorrow, or what you do next time?
Yeah. So again, you're just sticking with the questions.
Questions.
There's no accusations. It's just
you could ask them what their role was,
right?
Versus, well, did you do that? If they did, if they did cocaine at school, it's an important conversation to have.
Right.
And you'd want to dig a lot deeper into like, well, is this the first time, or has this been happening? How big of a problem do we have here? If they, cocaine aside, if they can be honest with you, whatever it is, it's really important that you celebrate and acknowledge how much you appreciate their level of honesty.
Yeah.
They're going to make mistakes. That's a given. You want them to be able to trust that talking to you makes sense and it's helpful. If you just turn, as the parent, just immediately turn towards threat, risk, consequences, they don't feel like it's helpful.
And or shaming, right?
Or the shaming.
The classic, oh, if they jumped off a bridge, you jump off one too? Huh?
Yeah, we heard that last night. It's uninteresting. But you're parenting out of this place of like fear, and then you're trying to like, I don't know, shame them into thinking differently versus like collect more information. Like, do you even know their stance on some of these subjects? Ask good, open-ended questions, and then roll with it. Don't feel like you've got to like punish it or address it in that second, which requires you to just have that calm role. Like you're the observer. You're kind of playing the aunt or uncle role, not the police or the detective. You might need to call in the detective and get more information, but let's see. Let's first like figure out like, oh my gosh, like how did you handle that? How did that go? What'd your friends think? Did anyone get caught? Would you do anything different next time in that situation? So those are all conversational kind of approaches versus the stereotypical lecture, threat. I'm I'm going to do this, that doesn't encourage them to be honest.
Right.
Another important like how is the nonverbal part of this. So if you can have this conversation shoulder to shoulder, lower your body position, not looking like straight on, that's just too intense for most people, especially teenagers and their parents, feeling like the parents just staring a hole through their skull, seeing all the truth, they're just like, oh my gosh, this is too much. But if you're driving home from school or you're running errands together and the music's not too loud, the podcast isn't too loud, and you turn it down, it's a super safe place and way to like talk to your teen, because they don't feel like you're there lecturing, like you're in it together.
Yeah. I think one of the safest places I can think of would be looking at old Clark W. Griswold when he chatted with Rusty and just sat down and said, let's have a beer together, Russ, huh? Side by side, shoulder to shoulder.
After he launched the car 50 feet. In the desert, but shoulder to shoulder, talking about beer.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. He's oblivious to Rusty chugging the whole beer and like one.
But how did he end that? I think he said, "Good talk, Russ."
Yeah,
good talk.
Yeah,
right?
I think Clark's character was obviously regularly disconnected from his audience. Rusty, I don't know how much Rusty cares, but the visual is, I'm not here telling you how you have to do life. I'm sharing this moment with you. So shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
If you're in their room, don't stand above them. Sit on the bed, sit on the chair, or sit on the floor. If you can lower your eyes below theirs, it feels safer. You're not there as an authoritative figure. You're there as someone who cares, and you're ready to connect. A lot of times parents come in and stand at the doorway and point out that the room's dirty. You should get off your phone. You haven't put these things away on the steps. Or you're not doing your homework. You said you're going to do your homework.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who wants to talk to that?
Right.
Like, no one, it's like your boss coming in. They don't ask you about your day, or they do it as a formality, but they're really just there to say, like, how come you didn't get this done? You could do better. You're like, I'm not going to tell this person how I think and feel. They're not putting the time in, and they're just going to bust me. So there's really no incentive for kids to be honest when parents immediately turn towards reaction versus connection. Right?
So I'm just imagining myself walking into the room. First thing I do, I turn my hat around backwards. I flip the chair around backwards, right? Sit on it backwards, cool style.
Yeah.
Or maybe, I don't know. Maybe they see right through that.
That's what the
hey
cool
guys,
yeah.
this is the cool. This
hey,
is
it's
the cool
just
dad.
the guy, just the cool guy
cool
trying to connect.
Just cool. Yeah.
No.
No.
I mean, cheese also shuts them down.
Yeah. No, I think my boys obviously have a huge cheese, dad cheese detector, and it goes off a lot. So
yeah, if let's say you go into Judd's room and it was a serious talk that you wanted to have, and he didn't want to have it, or he was tense or whatever, you go in, like lay down on the ground, back on the ground. If he's got a ball around, let's say he's got a football, you're just tossing the football up in the air to yourself. And it's like, hey, bud, how was your day? You are no threat based on your demeanor and that energy, right? You're not staring him down. Obviously, you're not super pissed because you're throwing a football in the air.
Right.
But you're inviting him in to a deeper conversation that you might need to get some information on. Even if it's what he thinks about something, let alone like the details. But you're also calmer because you're doing this thing that keeps you calmer, right? So like another part of the how goes back to when we talked about de-escalation in that podcast. We want to make sure that we're at a low enough level that we're giving off like calm energy, right? Because if we're giving off anxiety, we're giving off tension, it hits them. So you to go into the room and you lower your body position, you're going to feel less controlling of him when you're below him.
And this goes back to your nonverbals being 90% of communication.
Yeah, tone.
It was something really high like that.
Yeah, tone and nonverbals make up 90%. So to go in and sound like you're fine, you're good, you're grateful to be in the room with them. It's a privilege. Nothing's on fire. You're not there to bust him. It's calming and it's conversational and it's safer for him to be real and to probably have the real conversation you want to have versus the detective and he's pleading the fifth, or he's not going to out his friend, or why would I tell you? You're just going to take away my like car and I can't do this thing this weekend I want to do.
Right.
So I'd rather deal with the consequences of you being pissed that I don't share this with you versus share it and then just have consequences.
Yeah. Okay. I like it.
Another thing, this is a little tricky, but to be able to read when not to force it. So if it's not urgent, don't force the conversation. Like pick up my daughter from activities or school and she doesn't always want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
I might want to talk and I might want to know more about her day, but it's disrespectful for me to not respect her desire not to talk, right? She was just in a school of, I don't know how many kids are in that school, but a few thousand kids. Someone's staring at you or talking to you all day. And then I'm going to like, you need to talk to me now. Like how disrespectful, right? I wouldn't want someone to do that to me. I want the privilege to be like, hey, can I just take a breather? Like I've been around like hundreds of people all day. Like I don't really even know how I think and feel right now. And again, in teenage world and teenage experience, it can feel like a whirlwind, like a tornado of thoughts and emotions. They don't have it all figured out. Yes, it might be helpful to talk it out with mom or dad, but sometimes they just need a break. And teenage boys, this is the generalization, obviously, but a lot of times they need time to process to make sense of their day, or there really wasn't a lot to their day. It was like, it was fine. Yeah. And that's not a cover up. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. This kid sucked. This kid was awesome. This thing happened and it's all normal. Or it could be a lot happened and I had to make sense of it, or I just don't want to talk right now. And you don't need to like have power over them to be a parent. Like a lot of times parents like want to pull this parent card, like, well, but I need to talk to you. This is our time to connect and I need you to do that. It's like, that's a weird, authoritative, controlling kind of behavior, especially as they're becoming their own. You want them to feel like they get to enter in that relationship also, and it's not forced upon them. So sometimes we might go all the way home and don't talk at all. I would like to talk, not every time. Like sometimes I don't mind not talking either, but it's wise and mature, and it's good. I think it sends a good message to your kids that you're not always trying to pry something out of them.
Right.
You know, like I might say like, hey, it seems like you would rather like not talk. That's totally fine. If that changes, let me know. I'd love to hear more about your day if anything happened, but I also don't want to force you to talk to me. So like, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I said that often to both kids.
Yeah. So, I'm a real geek about the habits and the process, right?
Yeah.
So to me, I'm thinking, are there ways that you can sort of hack this to create habits and to create a process where you have that opportunity? So granted, let's say the drive home, yeah, that's a nice window, but like you said, she's talked to 1,000 people all day long and she might not want to. Are there other habits or processes you could put in your day to sort of create this environment? Maybe even like a spot, like you said, where there's a football and getting on the floor in a chair that's lower, where maybe it's bedtime routine or something to sort of make sure that there is a window to bring these things up.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of unforced, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm just thinking, if I had that daily process, then if something does come up and I'm like, oh shit, this isn't a good time, you're right in front of your friends, I'm not going to do this, but I can fall back to that daily, like having a habitual time that's like, okay, I'll bring it up then.
Yeah.
I mean, without us being like total robots and you got to do everything.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I was going to say.
No one's a robot, Dan.
No one. You're going to have, your kids are going to hate you, Dan. Mm-hmm. Their schedules and our home schedules are so complicated during the teenage years. The habit, I would say, if the habit is being intentional each day to connect, and you call that the habit, It's not as fine-tuned as you probably want for a habit, but it probably needs to be different. It could be the drive home. It could be at dinner. It's like, wins and losses for your day.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of build that habit of like checking in and be able to like practice sharing and practice releasing. It could be we didn't get to eat dinner because soccer practice ran till this time and then everyone ate on their own. It could just be before they go to bed, I want to make sure I can connect. So they're up in their room and you head in there and say, hey, I just didn't get a chance to connect with you. Wondering how your day was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters because the relationship is so organic and you want to have this organic, authentic relationship with your kid. I wouldn't want to put the habit in check-ins to where it felt robotic. And you could have a thing like, oh, we do this walk, or we like go and check on the chickens together and like collect eggs. And we always talk about our day, or we play catch from this time to this time. Nothing wrong with those at all. But during the teenage years, there's enough volatility in the week and with schedules that I would say it's going to be hard to capture an authentic conversation at the exact same time doing the exact same thing. It's more realistic to say, check in with your kid in whatever ways you can. Each day, do your best. Some days are going to be light. Some days are going to be heavier in terms of that connection.
Yeah.
But I'd say more intention than habit. And you could call that habit the intention of like, I'm going to make sure intentionally each day I'm connecting with the kid in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
Could be breakfast. Hey, how was last night? I know you're going to have that big conversation with your friend, or you were going to write that email to the teacher you're worried about. Like, did it go well? It's just kind of like a floating reminder of like, did you connect? Did you follow up with the right stuff? If you have a lifestyle and schedule that it can happen within those kind of structural things in the week, absolutely. If not, it's just going to be flexible and spontaneous, but you can still have that intention.
Right.
I said don't force. If it's something that you feel like they have done something wrong and they keep saying, I don't want to talk about it, right? So last week, my son, he is in 5th grade. The 6th grade assistant principal and school counselor came to his school to give like a kind of a preview and forecasting fun, like, here's what to expect. We're here to answer questions. My son had a friend who gave him a dare to ask a question during this like Q&A time with the principal. And this is kind of like, I'd say, a parenting failure and victory all in one. But the question was, I have a question. What happened? Would I be arrested if I put a pipe bomb in my friend's backpack?
Yeah.
And I have no idea how that landed. It could have been like half funny, half horrible. I'm sure all the adults were thinking, what the hell? What do we have here? A little terrorist, right?
Right.
So word comes back to us through email, how disappointed, how concerning. Like, obviously, we totally understand. The second I read the email, I thought, that sounds like a dare to me. Not that my kid doesn't make impulsive mistakes or says dumb things from time to time, but that was a little extreme for his humor.
Right.
And so he was sent to his room. He lost all screen privileges. It was heavy. It was, it was a Friday afternoon. And so there was a lot of parenting response to that. I got home and, I asked my wife, have you talked to him? Like, well, yeah, but he didn't really want to talk much. Okay. So our son is avoidant, tends to be avoidant when he doesn't like the way it feels, like the conversation or the topic. And this was a topic that was big enough to where he doesn't get to just say, I don't want to talk right now. Mm-hmm. Right. So as the parent, I'm like, well, you have to though. Like, this is too big of a deal. Like, if it were something small, I'd give you time. Maybe we let it settle and it goes away, or we talk about it tomorrow. That's fine. But this one's too big. And so, I'm like, I would sometimes ask him, do you want to talk about this? Right. And he would say no. And I'd say, well, okay, I was being nice. You have to talk about it. What I do, I went into his room. Now he's 11, so this isn't like teen necessarily talk, but he did something wrong. He knew it. He was crying. He felt bad. Didn't feel like I had to convince him that it was bad. There was no real teaching about the wrong thing. He already felt it. Like he wouldn't be crying. He felt really embarrassed. He felt like it was a misrepresentation of who he was. He was worried about how he was going to be perceived by the new school. All that stuff was already obvious. So I didn't feel like we had to go heavy there. So then I just got to ask him like, well, what happened? Was this your idea? I could say, what were you thinking?
Right.
That's not an interesting question in that tone. That's basically saying you're an idiot.
That's
right?
accusational.
Yeah.
And
It's rhetorical. And I would say, especially with teens, don't use rhetorical questions. Don't use sarcasm unless it's guaranteed to be funny. If it's not funny or if it's not clear where you're coming from, you're basically just sounding judgmental. And now they don't want to talk. They're not incentivized to talk to you if they're just getting peppered with accusations or judgments, right? So ask questions like what they think about their behavior. How do you feel about that? Like, is that how you wanted it to go? If you could do it over again, would you do it differently? Did it play out the way you thought it would? Did you get a chance to think about that beforehand, or was that spontaneous? The more you get them to think critically about their response, there's deeper learning. It's seeping deeper into their bones when you help them think critically versus just say right or wrong. Right or wrong doesn't really teach them maturity or growth. It's just as rules. And yes, there are rules, but more importantly, there's the why. Like, well, when does it really matter? And when does it not really matter? And there's some subjectivity to that. So the reason I brought that up with my son is because he could have easily said, no, I don't want to talk about this, Dad.
right.
And I would basically in my head like, well, tough shit. Like, we're going to talk about it. I didn't have to say that because we were able to talk about it pretty quickly. I asked a lot of questions. He did a great job sharing. He came up with a great solution. He's like, I'd like to go face-to-face with my school teacher and counselor, and I want to have a meeting with the assistant principal and the school counselor of the middle school so they have a better idea of who I am. And I didn't make that recommendation. That was his idea. We were able to carry it out,
Yeah.
and he did a great job. We go to the middle school, we sit down in the dean of students office, and he owned it appropriately. And it was really good for them to see like he's a good kid. Yeah, he made a really dumb decision, took a dumb dare, said a stupid joke that's not funny. And now it's going to be okay because he's learning and he's going to grow. And that's what growing up and learning is all about, right? Learning from our mistakes. So I didn't have to force it, but I would have. So
Right.
there's times where you're like, if you don't have to force it, don't force it. If you do everything you can to get them to engage before you have to kind of do the parent card, like, well, hey, I'm sorry, like, we have to talk about this. So like, we can't just let this continue to sit out there. So don't force, but you have the right to and the need to sometimes.
And this is probably that line in the sand of versus being a friend and a parent, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about that a little bit. Like, yeah, you want to be their friend and let them confide in you, but you
That's a
are
good
also
point.
their parent, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, well, these are kind of, you're under this house or you're living under it here. Like, this is, we're doing it this way. And you just gotta pull
The
rank every now and
parental role in that situation is more important than just
Right.
being friendly. And so that's why you'd say, well, I'm your parent first, and you wouldn't say I'm your friend second, but it's I want a friendship, but my role in your life as a parent is way more important. And teaching right or wrong or helping you learn these things is top priority.
then.
And so we have to have this conversation, So another how-to that's really important is when you're talking to them, if you can use reflective listening, is your ability to hear what they're saying and feeling and reflect that versus just respond to it, right? So to say, sort of my son's situation, the reflective listening would say, it sounds like you feel bad that you took the dare and said asked that question, and now you're feeling bad about that. It also sounds like you regret this because you're worried about how the new school is going to see you. right? I'm kind of reinforcing the lessons,
Kind of validating and reinforcing.
but I'm validating the experience,
Yeah.
right? Dads in particular have a hard time not giving advice. And
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard.
like, what are you talking about? And the validating feels kind of pointless compared to advice, right? Advice feels helpful for guys to give advice, to give reflective, like it sounds like this experience has made you feel this way. To most guys, feels pointless. It's like, well, I don't care how you feel. Let's get to how you not do that again, and we won't even have this problem.
Mm-hmm.
But they're likely to disengage if we can't hone in on how they're feeling. And we get more out of the conversation the more we understand. And we're validating them to feel like we were listening. Mm-hmm. We do get what it's like to be them. And the parents have a hard time doing that because they feel like kids' experiences are light and unicorns and rainbows, and a stressful day isn't something to be stressed about. And so it's hard to validate because we are like, but it's nothing like my life. It's a kid's life. They don't have anything to worry about. But if they don't feel seen and heard, they don't feel like you're really there. And so then why would they listen to your advice?
Yeah.
They don't feel like you really get where they're coming from. So your advice misses. But to say that sounds like that was really hard. I'm sorry. I know how much that friendship means to you. That it sounds like that was hard to hear. Or it makes sense that you feel that way because that feels like it's a mischaracterization of who you are. That's a validation of the experience that shows I was paying attention, and not just to the conversation, but I get them. Like I see what they value. I know what they care about. That validation captures that. And now it's like, this person's on my team. They do get me. I've worked with a lot of teens over the years that don't feel like their parents get them. And their parents will say, I get you more than you get yourself. But they'll say that and not even realize like how big that misses. It's like, well, that's not going to make them share more. When they believe that, and then you say that, to them, it even highlights even more so, like, you really don't know who I am, because I would never think that or say that or feel that way. So you arrogantly are telling me who I am. Now, granted, sometimes as parents, we do know certain things about our kids that the kids don't acknowledge or know. Mm-hmm. But don't say that.
Right.
It doesn't land well ever. It's not interesting. It sounds oddly, in an unuseful way, arrogant, right? Versus just say, reflect back on what you're hearing them say and feel. They feel understood in that situation. They're going to feel safer, and they're more apt to listen to if there is any wisdom or if there is some learning. They're more likely to hear it in that process because they feel like you're in it with them.
And I probably feel like it gives them a chance to correct you if you got it wrong.
Yeah, which
right?
is...
You're like, well, actually, that's not what I'm saying. Dad, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah.
It's a great example because sometimes we don't get it right. Mm-hmm. And it's a great chance to show some humility and be like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard that. Mm-hmm. And then get back on the right road. Like, oh, there's a little detour. Well, hold on. Let me go back a little bit to make sure I was like more accurately getting what you were saying. So, what were you thinking or feeling or saying in that situation? Because I maybe heard the wrong thing. Like, that's good communication skills. You're clarifying, you're showing some humility, you're cleaning things up, like, so that you move forward together in that situation.
Yeah.
So validating's hard here's the hardest part as a parent, when you have to validate a behavior or a feeling that you don't agree with, because you don't want to feel like you're going on record saying
that you approve.
I agree
thing.
with you. Right. And it is tricky because teenagers can hear, I agree with you when you say, I hear you. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is a slippery slope that I think does need a little bit of follow-up to say, well, hey, hold on. What I hear you saying is you were under a lot of pressure. You felt like your friends put you up to this thing. You didn't fully agree with it, but you did it. And you don't really feel like it should be on you or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. To validate that is to say, it sounds like you felt peer pressure, and it sounds like that's not who you wanted to be, and you don't want to be known as that. Well, the hard part is the parent doesn't want them to think that's okay.
Right.
And so they don't validate, and they go in on addressing the misstep. And then the kid's like, yeah, but you don't understand like how hard that was for me. Like it was more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
Those feelings and those words and the setting felt more powerful than you're describing it right now. And the parent could just miss it and say, oh, I don't care how it felt. You can't do that.
Right.
And because you don't seem to learn these lessons the easy way, I'm going to teach you the hard way. And, the downside to that is the kids thinking, I don't want to talk to you if this is how it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't have it all figured out. I have to learn these things. You're here to like help me learn. This is not the best way to help me learn by just jumping to consequences or threats. I need to learn how do I make good decisions when I'm emotionally flooded. I need to learn what it's like to make difficult decisions when I'm feeling peer pressure or I'm confused, right? And the parent misses out on the chance to engage them in that situation when they said, you should know better. It's like, okay, but that's just not interesting. Of course they should know better, but what does that mean? They didn't, and it didn't work. So go back and like coach and teach and uncover like, okay, well, I feel like we've talked about this before. Like it's not cool to, I don't know, steal a car.
Yeah.
Like it should go without saying, but that wasn't enough. So help me understand at what point along that night on that journey did your moral, decision making say, well, I feel like we can do a joyride. It's not that big of a deal. Like, help, like really tapping into that space or uncovering that space is interesting as a parent versus you should know better. And because you don't, now I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You basically remove them from the learning conversation and you just move it into a power play. There are times you have to do a power play as a parent, obviously, even at every age. But it's more interesting to your teenager. It's better for your teenager to have a conversation about the moral decision-making, the circumstances, the emotional flooding, whatever the factors are. So they actually are set up better next time. Mm-hmm. Facilitate their learning experience versus just be the judge doling out consequences.
Well, this literally just happened to me this morning, and I feel like I just had a huge parenting fail. Now that you just described that, and this was a 7-year-old, so she's not even a teenager yet. So, but I think it applies to, all the kids. I just turned around and all I saw was she kicked one of her brothers, right? And I just went right in with the hard line. We don't do violence. We don't kick. We don't hit. We don't do things like that, right?
Yeah.
Without validating at all sort of how she felt or the happened, and then it just immediately she just then was defensive and stormed off, didn't want to talk about it, and so I think I could have just completely handled that differently without just doling out a consequence right away, right?
Yeah.
And just, and yeah.
Because it wasn't urgent.
It wasn't urgent, and it just went sideways, right?
Yeah. It's a great example because that could be a 7-year-old kicking her brother. It could be a 17-year-old stealing from her brother, or not coming home and getting her brother to cover it up for her.
Yeah,
like age appropriate level. You want to learn as much as possible from the kid in terms of what they're thinking and feeling. You want them to learn as much as they can about what they were thinking and feeling, and how it lands and how it affects everyone else. Think about, when do you learn best? When you're feeling threatened, cornered, your stuff's being, taken away from you, or loving, calm, patient, and exploratory, right? Like, tell me more about that. Like, what was that night like? Like, how did it start off? You're there with them, like the aunt or the uncle who's not feeling solely responsible for the kid, but caring, but they're facilitating like their own learning experience. You might have to give consequences at the end. You might have to take something away, but to facilitate their learning is what's best for them. And we skip that stage and sometimes blow it up by moving right towards doling out consequences or, removing privileges. So it takes a lot of patience and, I think wisdom to go into that situation. Like, don't react. If it's not on fire, You don't need a fire hose. Sit down, take a breather. If you need to take a walk, you need to take some notes, you need to set your own intention, go back to the de-escalation tips, get yourself well below a 5 before you have this conversation. Like, even if you're in the car, if you're pissed, if you're at a 7 or 8, now is not the time. It's too risky, right? It's not worth it going sideways, especially when it's not urgent. It's like, wait until you're calmer. Wait till they're calmer. Wait till they've had a snack. I mean, basic things like, well, do you want to be bugged when you're hungry or tired? No. Do you get snappy and regret some things you say or do when you're hangry? Yes. Okay. Have a snack in the car, let them get home, unpack, whatever. Then later on, after they settle in, like, hey, can I talk to you? Let's go do this thing together. Will you run this errand with me? Will you get the mail with me? Will you help me carry this out back? And then while you're doing your thing, be like, hey, I got an email from your teacher. Hey, some parents shared that you and your friends did this thing the other night. I just want to know what you think about that. Right? Like, the consequences, you always have the consequences in your back pocket. You're never giving those away. You all can pull those out anytime you need to. But sometimes you just squash the conversation and the learning opportunity to lead with the consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, it just jumps out. I just have to focus on that validation before I go to those consequences, right?
Yeah.
Or go to anything, right?
It's better
like
for
if
your
I miss
mood,
that step.
It'll be better for you to go into that mode because it's hard to be angry and empathetic at the same time.
Right.
It's hard to be validating their experience and still be like, oh man, I'm going to bust you. They're different.
Yeah.
They're different parts of the mind, different emotions at that point. You're better off facilitating their learning experience versus just expressing your anger. Like, what's the point of that? There are times where getting angry with our kids might prove the point more, but it's risky. It's not always straightforward, and it's usually not that intelligent, and it's usually not a lot of learning on their part. It's just like, oh, dad's pissed. Don't do that again. You're like, okay, but you might. I'd rather you know why you did it and have more more introspection and more self-awareness next time versus just don't do it because dad gets pissed. Because you know what happens in the teenage years? They learn that they can get away with stuff. And so then if it's just as long as dad doesn't find out and that's their only like moral consideration, they're going to keep doing it. I listen to kids all the time. Stereotypically, they smoke a ton of weed and they're getting busted. And it's like, well, why did you feel like you did it again? Or you could do it again? Because I didn't think I'd get caught.
Right.
It wasn't about like what's good for my life or what message does it send or does it compromise my night or my day the next day. It was, am I going to get caught? Because if I don't get caught, I'm fine with it. Now, that's complicated. Depends on the subject that they're considering. But if the only reason they're not doing it is because mom and dad might get mad, it's just not good enough.
Yeah.
They grow out of that, right? So fast forward, they're 18, 19, they leave for college or leave the house, and mom and dad aren't there to get mad. It's all on them, right? And so you failed to help them take more ownership of like what's healthy and good for them. Does that mean every kid makes all the right choices if you like set these conversations up this way? Obviously not. But they're more likely to be more self-aware, and they're more likely to appreciate someone entering into that space, having a conversation with them versus just say, sorry, you can't do that. Now I'm mad and I'm taking all your stuff away. The kid's learning opportunity is diminished. And that makes no sense from the parent. We want to make the learning opportunity as big as possible. Conversation and them making sense of their thoughts and feelings is the best opportunity for them to do that.
I mean, I think when you said going off to college, that just struck a chord with me, saying by the two different paths of one parent saying, I'm going to ask questions and validate and have that conversation and let somebody tell you why they're making these decisions and understand, right? Versus I'm doing this thing or not doing this thing because I'm afraid of my parents and the consequences, right?
Yeah.
And now you just fast forward to college.
Yeah.
One of them is equipped with sort of the why and taking ownership and validating their own feelings and why are they doing things right, versus the other one's just like, well, parents aren't here, I'll do whatever I want. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And it usually it can blow up because it goes from like control or underground behavior to now no limits, no one's around, I'm going to do whatever I want. Now, obviously not all kids blow up their lives given that freedom. But why go down that road when you could very strategically give them, more and more freedom, loosen the reins each year a little bit more than you would like to. Like that's kind of my stereotypical advice to parents of teenagers is give them a little bit more freedom than you would like, because it's going to be over way quicker than you anticipate.
Yeah.
And so, I just feel like we should protect them as long as we can. Nope, not the right idea. You should get them practicing as soon as you can, age appropriate, within reason, so that they have a safety net there to fall in that you can help facilitate the learning, versus they're out of the house, they're living on their own or at college. You don't know their mistakes. There is no safety net, and the problems get intensified, versus they were little ones at 15 and 16 or 17, but you get a chance to talk about it, right? Mm-hmm. So I encourage parents often, give away a little bit more control than you'd really like, so they get to practice and learn, and you get to practice having those facilitating kind of conversations that they can learn, because those years go by so quickly and then they're out.
Yeah.
Right. You were talking about the statistics the other day about by what age have you spent, X amount of percentage of time with your kids. And by 18, it's like a really big percentage.
Yeah. It just falls off a cliff after
and then
that.
That's not that that's it, but it's just so different versus build rapport and have conversations about their poor choices and just their life without feeling like you've got to be the judge all the time. That's just quickly going to be an irrelevant position in life.
Yeah.
Right. So, don't force, but have the conversation when it's really important. It's very important to be validating. If there's nothing else you do from that conversation, if you could only do one thing, I would say just validate their experience.
Yeah.
And then I'd follow it up with a good question at the end. Like, what's your plan?
So this is the final step.
What are you going to do with this?
Yeah.
How would you like to handle it? How do you want to see this go? Do you need more support from myself or your mom and I? Do you need some practice brainstorming your plan? Like a question that gives them a sense of confidence that they have a plan, and or reveals the next step. So like, oh yes, you do need to have a plan. So real quick, daughter party, drinking, hasn't been around that scene very much. This is her freshman year. And so the last thing I wanted to do was the last step I wanted to have with her is, what's your plan before you go to the party? You're not going to drink. So what are you going to say when you're offered?
Yeah.
And do you feel comfortable? Does that feel you? Does it feel natural? Don't lie, because that's going to feel funky. You can lie if that's like the last ditch effort to lie and get them off your back. Okay. But there are lots of ways to say no thanks. And not feel weird about it. So we rehearse that a little bit. Like, all right, how do you want to say it? What if it's this boy? What if it's this girl? What if everyone's doing this? Just to like role play a little bit, the familiarity of that situation. And then I left it with, all right, what's your plan? And she said it, and was like, I love it. Go get them.
Yeah.
So it empowers them. And it makes them think about what they're going to do versus me boss her into a situation that's like my agenda, not hers.
Yeah. So did you get any follow-up or check-in on the party?
It did. Yeah. She wasn't
This just
pressured.
Scares the shit out of me, by the way. Like, I'm just not ready for this.
Yeah.
I mean, but we all know it's going to happen, right? It's just all going to be
Yeah,
part
but
of the
think
fun.
about it. Were you scared to go to a party when you were a teenager?
No, I was stoked.
You were so excited.
Couldn't wait.
Right? And the more crazy shit that went down, the more fun the party was.
Yeah.
And the more you're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's just so important to realize what's scary to us is not often scary to them. Now, that doesn't always mean it's okay, right? Like I could be scared of something that really is dangerous, and my son or daughter is like, Dad, you're just an adult. You're like, well, but this people die doing this thing. Please be aware, but you have to normalize it and say, what was it like for you to be that age? Are you going to be able to prevent it? No. You're going to have to, like, at some point, Judd, Tyler, and Carly are going to be like out in the world doing life, and you're not there to say yes or no. And so the sooner you can have conversations about it, I'm not saying the sooner they can go to a party, the better. That's not the message. The sooner you can talk about these, what do you want to call them? Like morally complicated, difficult situations, right? The sooner you lay that groundwork for this is how we talk about it, the more likely you're going to get them to think about it more critically, to be more open with you, be more known, which strengthens a relationship, and basically broadens the pipeline of wisdom to be able to pass through it. And be like, well, hey, I've been in your shoes.
Right.
I've been to parties. I've seen some things be really funny and go really poorly. And I've got plenty of life lessons. I don't want to keep those to myself. I'd love to share those with you as we kind of navigate this road ahead. But often parents are so fearful of their kids entering into that space that they either try to cut the whole thing off and say you can't go to those parties, right? Or they just don't talk about it because they don't know how to do it.
Right.
And the kid's not better off from either one of those scenarios. They'd be better off to say, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what our rules are, what our hopes are, what our plans are. I'd like to hear your plans.
Yeah.
Anytime I work with a kid and they're doing something that's illegal or not healthy, I can't be the police. I can't be the judge because we're not going to have a good relationship, especially as a therapist. But I always ask them, what's your plan with that? And what's too much look like for you? Right. So another part of like growing up is knowing limits. Well, not having done everything, you don't always know your limits. So to sort of build some of those road signs in place of like, well, how do you know you're going too fast? How do you know you've maybe drank too much or smoked too much or got too far with this boy or a girl? Like, I don't know. What are your limits? What does it look like? Question. They don't know. Well, let's like, what are some generic consequences? Right? Like, have you seen a friend drink too much, go too far, smoke too much? Oh, what did it look like? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, are you worried about that? Does that matter to you? Yeah, I don't want to look like that. I don't want to feel like that. Oh, okay. Well, then what's like a checkpoint before you get too far? Right? So you notice the energy of that conversation compared to the generic dad parent conversation that just says you can't do this.
Yeah. It was either you can't do this or in my experience, just there was no conversation, right? Like that wasn't modeled for me, and so I think that's probably a big challenge for the parents of this generation, right? All the pretty good parents out there right now, go have those conversations with your kids, right?
Yeah,
go model it, go share from your own experiences
at every age level,
right?
Too, because there's something at their age level that you're worried about, right? Or that's potentially wrong. Even if it's like what do you do when a kid challenges you to ask about a pipe bomb in the backpack?
Yeah.
Right? Like role playing those scenarios is like training and teaching, right? You just don't train and teach when you say don't do it. You teach your 3-year-old, don't throw food.
Right.
Right? Like you don't teach your 13-year-old, don't do, you have to. It's conversational. It's nuanced. Well, I was like my best friend. I wasn't expecting them to do that. And I got caught off guard. And I only wanted to try like one beer. And then my decision-making was compromised. And now it was too far. And then you're like, okay, well, what could you have done differently? Do you want to make some adjustments next time? Is that how you want it to go? Right? Like it just lowers the tension level in their life. It doesn't make them so isolated because they have to keep it from their parent. I can't cover like all the nuances and all the roads to go down because there's so many different scenarios.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that parents don't give consequences when their kids do the wrong thing. But this podcast in particular is like how to talk to your teen you're not going to have an interesting, helpful conversation if it's just threats.
Yeah.
If it's just getting the scoop and then busting them or judging them, you're just going to have a limited conversation and therefore a limited relationship, which is not what's best for them.
Yeah. So to go back to the last step about what's your plan, what are your thoughts on using that what's your plan question for sort of the consequence or the punishment, right? So,
I love that. I do
so
that
I'm thinking,
often.
yeah, so I'm thinking about right now with Carly, my 7-year-old, who decided to just, kick a brother in the shin or whatever. And I'm like, oh, we can't do violence. You're in timeout. And I might have had to yell to the timeout because she stomped off and ran somewhere else. So now I'm yelling.
Yeah.
I didn't validate, but obviously that's why I'm here. That's why I'm learning, Josh.
Yeah.
Yep. But now I'm thinking it probably would have been so much better if I obviously went through these steps and then especially the validation part. And then I could be like, okay, you kicked your brother. Let's think about this. We agree that we don't do violence. We don't need to resort to violence when you can't. What's your plan for next time? And what's your plan for either like your punishment or ways to think about it?
Yeah.
And then maybe she can choose timeout on her own. Is that?
I think
You like
I
that
do that
idea?
often.
Yeah.
If it's not steep enough of a consequence, you just say,
She's like, give me candy.
yeah. Then you just say, we're going to try again.
Yeah.
And you don't need to come up with anything yet.
Right.
I would give it 2 or 3 rounds and see if they come up with something that's like appropriate, right? Commensurate to the misstep.
Right.
In that particular example, I know you were just giving a bunch of different questions, but just because she's 7, just one question.
Yeah.
Wait, let it set, see what she says. You're addressing what the consequences should be and what does she need to do to her brother, but separate those to give her time to think about one thoroughly before flooding her with 2 or 3 things. And the timing could be huge. She could still be pissed, and you're not going to get all of her wits engaged in the conversation. So I probably would have let her run off and not chase her, because you can't chase her and keep your energy low.
Yeah.
Right? You go up.
Yeah.
She's already up. And so now it's like, oh, this is not going to be that smart.
Right.
Let her run off. Calm yourself down. Go in. Maybe you're the snake. Maybe you're something else. Doesn't really matter. Just go in. You're there. You're loving. This is a privilege to teach your daughter how to say sorry, how to own her mistake, and get back on track. Right? Like, notice the shift of like how it reframed. It's like, this is parenting privilege.
Yeah.
If you don't see teaching and helping your kids learn as a privilege, you're parenting from the wrong space.
Yeah. I love that. It's a
Because
great.
what is it if it's not teaching them about life and themselves and how to get along, right?
Right.
Just because they did the wrong thing, that's an inconvenience to you, but that's the parenting role,
Yeah.
right? And so give ourselves time to calm down, think it through, go in, ask good questions. I always start by asking the kid, not matter what their age, but definitely 7 and up, probably 4 or 5 and up. What do you think is a fair consequence or way to make this right?
Yeah.
The word consequence sometimes is not even interesting,
Right.
right? Or misleading. It's like, how do we make this right? Given that our family is about keeping our bodies safe and our other people safe, your choice, violated that. What's it look like to make this right?
Yeah.
With your brother? What's it look like to make this right with your mom and I after you lied about where you're going to be and you lied about who you're going to be with, when we've always stressed being honest is more important than anything else? What's it look like to make this right? Like, there's a lot of power that they're going to feel on their chest, but appropriately.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they've hurt someone they love. They should feel a little bit of the weight of that. Right? But I didn't throw it at her in that example. I presented a scenario that revealed the reality, revealed the truth, but then she gets to think about it critically in that example.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and it's just so much better than me just yelling at her to go sit in a chair. Right? Oh, that's great. Oh, look at you. You're in a chair.
Hoping the chair
Yeah.
process
Please,
injects
chair,
her with
give her wisdom.
right?
Yeah, exactly. The
It
chair
gets
of
even
wisdom.
more, it gets even less intelligent.
And how much
as-
do we do that, right? Oh, we do it all the
It's
time.
just not paying attention. It's reacting. It's not thinking. And it's thinking like if you just taught the right things, your kids don't make any mistakes. And then they do and you get pissed.
Yeah.
You're like, no. This is it, man. This is the parenting moment.
Yeah.
They're obviously revealing they have some things to learn, or they got flooded emotionally, or they got peer pressured, or whatever this. They're revealing that there's some teaching necessary.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be a pretty good parent, you see that as a privilege to enter into that space to teach.
Yeah.
When we're reactive parents, we're not intelligent parents, and our teaching is compromised. Like it still might deliver a message from time to time, right? There's lots of unintelligent decisions that still work.
Yeah.
But this is about being pretty good, and pretty good is thinking it through and striving for a more intelligent response. I want them to learn why this matters. Okay, then have a conversation about it. Don't just like dole out threatening consequences. It's lazy and it's usually emotionally driven.
Mm-hmm.
It's not thinking, how do they learn the best from this?
Yeah.
Like, that's a good question. Like, how do they learn the best from this situation? And then craft your plan versus react, go in and squash and just throw a consequence and be like, I'm being a parent.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but not necessarily a wise one.
Yeah. Well, again, Josh, apparently I've learned some things or two again, and I can't wait to go try these. But let's recap real quick. So how we talk to your teen, I'm going to recap. You keep me honest, okay?
Yeah.
So number one, I got on the how-to. Just make it conversational, right? Make it like no lectures, more questions. Just keep it conversational. Two, all about nonverbal. So again, the tone and the nonverbal are 90% of communication. So that's, going not face to face, standing over them, arms, crossed, just getting down on the floor below their eye level, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Number three, find a good setting, right? So often in private or doing an activity, like you gave an example of just throwing a football up in the air, doing something that sort of just keeps, kind of that energy and mood, right? And in a good setting. And then the next step, fourth one would be timing, right?
Yeah.
Don't force it, right? But then also, I think you gave a really great example of also if it's really important, and then maybe the timing does matter. And you're like, you know what? I'm sorry. This one warrants it. It's pretty big. We're going to deal with it right now. Right. And so I think you probably need to, as a parent, make that decision. Right. Yeah. So number five, this one really stuck out to me, validating. Right. It just basically being a mirror back to them on what you heard and say, oh, like, correct me if I'm wrong. This is what I'm hearing, or this is what I hear from you. Yeah. Letting them be seen. Right. And then the last one, what's your plan? Right. Just coming in with that question. Hey, what's your plan? And then also, what does it look like? Right. Yeah. What does it look like if you do this, if X, Y, Z, right? Yeah. So, and then I think that just to round it out too, just that it is a privilege. That one really struck a chord with me too. This whole, how do you talk to your teen? How do you talk to your kids? Yeah. It's a privilege. Yeah. Right. And it's a great,
it's easy to forget, man.
Yeah. So
I use a coaching example a lot because just sports analogies work for a lot of guys, but it'd be like a coach getting pissed that he's got to like blow the whistle at practice and teach a technique. Mm-hmm. You're like, well, that's your job. Like that's exactly why you're here, is to help this player, like, get this thing better. So to be burdened by blowing the whistle and teaching is like, why are you even a coach? Yeah. Parent, raising wise, healthy, young, learning young adults, right? So making mistakes is like an opportunity to continue to teach and help them be better, versus getting pissed that it's going the wrong way or this means something about them or you. It's the reframe can be really helpful and liberating. Yeah. To look at that privilege standpoint versus it just getting in the way of your day or catastrophizing their life because of this choice. Like, this is the learning process. You didn't make mistakes. I'm sure you did. Maybe even more than your kid has up to this point. and you turned out okay. So let's not freak out.
Yeah. Great stuff. Well, you heard it there. Pretty Good Parents. Go have a conversation with your teen. And if they're not a teen, go have a conversation with them anyways. And you got some good steps on how to do it. So, yeah. Thanks again, Josh. And again, thank you out there, listeners. And again, we love and appreciate any like and subscribe. And if you want to share this with anybody and you think it might resonate with them, feel free to share it. So, yeah. Thank y'all, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Dan.